Greetings everyone, welcome to the channel. We are the Lion Gaming Crew, and in this Diablo 4 video we're going to be talking about the best global stat affixes for all classes here in Diablo 4, and we're also going to talk about when you should enchant gear. We're going to talk about early endgame, which is level 50 to 80, and late endgame, which is level 80 to 100. And if you are level 0 to 50, I would not recommend enchanting your gear at all, because by the time you enchant that, you're probably going to find something better in a couple of minutes or hours, depending on how much you play. So if you're level 0 to 50, just come back and watch this video when you hit level 50, because I'm sure you're going to find something useful in this video. So we're going to start off with weapons, because in this game, weapons are where a majority of your damage is going to come from, and the affixes on these can either make or break your build. So starting off, depending on what class you choose, whether it be barbarian, sorcerer, druid, and etc., necromancer and all that, you're gonna either choose a main hand or offhand. The only exception to this rule is the barbarian, which has his 4 weapons at all times, being a bludgeoning weapon, a slashing weapon, and 2 dual wield weapons. So talking about weapons, what affixes do you want to see? I'm not going to touch on the inherent affix on this one. It is going to be crowd controlled enemies, because that is an inherent affix on staves. We are going to talk about the affixes that you see beneath that. On this weapon right here, we got damage to close enemies, we got overpowered damage with werebear skills, we got critical strike with earth skills, and we got 126 to willpower. So what you want to see on your weapon, you want to see your class main stat, which is either going to be willpower, intelligence, dexterity, or strength. You're also going to want to see either damage to close enemies or damage to distant enemies, depending on whether you're a melee build or a ranged build. Other good stats you want to see: damage with core skills. Core skill damage is probably one of the best affixes in the entire game, and you want to see it all the time. Other than that, though, vulnerable damage. Those are the top 4 affixes you want to see on your weapons at all times. Those are really going to enhance your build's potential, and those are the top 4 affixes that you can roll on your weapons. Talking about sockets in weapons, the best sockets to put in right now are emeralds, because they give you critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, and at this point in the game you should have the exploit glyph unlocked and socketed into one of your glyph sockets. So every time you damage an enemy, they are going to become vulnerable. So that is why we recommend putting emeralds in there, because then you get with 2 sockets 24% critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. Moving on to the boots. These are where a majority of your movement speed is going to come from. So what you would like to see, now this can depend on different classes, that's why we're going to kind of breeze over it. So the classes that are melee, you're going to want to have max evade charge, right? So 1 to 3, you ideally want to have 3 as the inherent one. If you are a ranged build, you're going to want to have movement speed, evade increases movement speed by whatever percentage, 40, 50, 60%. That's what you want to see if you're ranged. For melee, you want max evade charges. For affixes, you want movement speed, your class main stat, resource cost reduction, and movement speed after killing an elite. Those are the top affixes for your boots. Because first off, when you're running nightmare dungeons in the early and late game, you're going to run across a lot of elites, and having increased movement speed is going to increase your clear speed, which is going to net you more XP per hour. Having that class main stat on there is going to increase your skill damage, which is always good, and having a resource cost reduction is going to be better in the late game. More resource cost reduction means your skill is going to cost less to cast, which is always good. Moving on to pants. The inherent stat that you want is going to say, while injured, your potion grants you movement speed for whatever. That's what you want, all right? As far as the affixes go, you want damage reduction from distant enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, straight damage reduction, right? Just flat damage reduction, and then total armor. Or armor, just armor, okay? All right, moving on to the gloves. What you want to see on every pair of your gloves is you want critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, attack speed, and ranks to your main skill, right? So we are a pulverized druid, so we got 4 ranks to pulverize. Okay, the only exception to this rule is sorceress. For the sorceress, you want a affix that says lucky hit, chance to restore X amount of resource, right? But other than that, though, every other class in the game, you want critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, attack speed, and ranks to your #1 core skill. Okay, moving on to the chest piece. You want damage reduction from distant enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, flat damage reduction, and total armor, or if you use fortify a lot like barbarians and druids, you can have damage reduction while fortified. That is also a good stat. I forgot to mention that on the pants. If you are a druid or something like that, you could have total armor while in werebear or werewolf form. That is okay as well. It doesn't have to be just flat armor, so just wanted to put that out there. Damage reduction while fortified is also really good, so it just kind of depends on your class. If you aren't a druid or a barbarian, you don't use fortified, then you just want to be looking for total armor. Okay, moving on to the helm. So the helm can be a little bit divisive because a lot of builds will use a unique in their helm slot. If you're using a unique helm, you're stuck with the affixes that roll. But let's say you're not using a unique, these are the affixes you want to look for: cooldown reduction, maximum life, damage, like damage while shapeshifted, damage, etc. And then you want to be looking for either one of the resistances, or even, I could even say, resource cost reduction. You could have cooldown reduction, resource cost reduction. Both of those are really good, but you definitely want maximum life, and you want some form of damage, right? Whether it be, like I said earlier, damage while shapeshifted, damage, a little bit of damage is always good on your helm, because on your gear, a majority of your damage is coming from your weapon, your gloves, your amulets, and your rings, and your helm, okay? Moving on to the amulet. Best rolls on the amulet are going to be cooldown reduction, resource cost reduction, movement speed, and a rank to your best class passive. So this one we have the Renaissance passive. Ideally you want 3 ranks, that way you can take off those ranks of that passive and put them into other things to make your build stronger. So those are the best affixes. Resistance to all elements is really not that much, but ideally you'd like to get that as high as possible. Moving on to the rings. These are all going to be the same for both rings, all classes. You want vulnerable damage, maximum life, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance. Those 4 affixes are what you want to see. And ideally, you would like to have, let's say this one has lightning resistance and fire resistance. Well, on your alternate ring, you'd like to see shadow and poison resistance, so that way you're covering all your bases in terms of resistance. And then you got the all resist on your amulet. That means you're always going to have some form of resistance. And for the sockets on the jewelry, you're going to want to either socket, if you're playing in season, Wrathful Heart. The best in slot Wrathful Hearts right now are the Barber, and then this caged heart right here that gives you 20% flat damage reduction, and then you can pick the third one. Right here we have the Devious Heart for the Druid that allows us to pull enemies whenever we have an ultimate skill active. That one's really up in the air. There is a lot of them that are class specific. I'm not really going to go into the best ones. I'll probably have a video breaking down all the best hearts right now for season 1 here in the near future for those players that are interested in that. And covering sockets for the armor, you're always going to want to put rubies in every single time. Maximum life is good for every single build. I would have recommended topazes until they took out a lot of the crowd control that was bugging a lot of players, so now it went back to rubies. So rubies are always going to be in the best for your armor, whether you're in seasonal or non-seasonal. And if you're in non-seasonal, we recommend putting skulls in your jewelry because we don't have access to caged hearts in non-seasonal. So I really hope you all enjoyed this video. It definitely helped me out to know what to look for on my gear, and that's why I wanted to push this video out to everyone, because it can be a lot when you're trying to compare gear. And now we're going to get into when to enchant, right? So if you're early endgame, 50 to 80. You really only want to be enchanting if the item is a general upgrade for the piece of gear that you're having. So let's say you just got into World Tier 3, you have all sacred gear, and you start finding some ancestral items. If you have an item that has, let's take these gloves for example, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, attack speed, and whatever the 4th, let's say the 4th affix was, gosh, what could I say, something ridiculous, just something you don't want, right? Okay, so you gotta first, before we get into that, I'm sorry guys, before we get into that, I need to put this out there because I don't think a lot of people know about this. So you need to put on an advanced tooltip compare and advanced tooltip information, right? After you put that on, you're gonna notice your gear now has these little brackets. Okay, inside the bracket, it's got like, well, we're looking at lucky hit chance here, 8.1 to 16.5. Okay, so you compare all those. You look at your rolls. Okay, so let's say you got 3 ranks to pulverize and you want to get it to 4. We look at your item power, right? So to get to the 4 ranks of pulverize, it has to be above 770 item power. Okay. All right, if that makes sense. I know it's a lot to take in, so we'll do it on the boots, right? Same deal. You got movement speed after killing the elite, you got movement speed, you got willpower, but you're missing spirit cost reduction. Let's say I rolled with something else, like, something that you're not going to use. Okay, so you look at all of the other brackets, right? Okay, say you got 22% movement speed for 4 seconds after killing the elite. You got 24.8, which out of 26.2 is the highest roll. You got 48 out of 63 on willpower. I wouldn't enchant these, okay? Because if you look at all of the other rolls, the first roll, the movement speed after killing the elite, it isn't very high. So even if you roll that spirit cost reduction that you were missing, you're still going to be missing out on about 19% movement speed after killing elite. You're going to be missing out at 2% your normal movement speed, and you're going to be missing out about 12 on the willpower, if that makes sense, right? So you really only want to be enchanting when you have perfect rolls on everything else, right? So this is kind of a bad example because this gear, it isn't perfect, right? So I'm trying to find one that would even be close to perfect, but that's what the thing about enchanting is, right? Like this one is a good example right here. So we got 10%, 10.3% cooldown reduction, which is the max roll. We got 20.9% on our spirit cost reduction, which is only 3% off the maximum. We got 29.2% on our ultimate skill damage, and we got 1 rank of the Renaissance passive. So if I were to enchant this item, I would re-roll the Renaissance passive because I would want to try to get it to 3, if that makes sense, because the other ones are already close to their max roll, so there's no point in re-rolling that spirit cost reduction to try to get up to 23.7% when it's already at 20.9%, because you're only missing about 2.2%. So realistically, in a perfect world, you'd have unlimited resources and you could just enchant all day long, and you'd have unlimited gold and you could just sit there enchanting, but that's not how it is, right? So every time you press that enchant button, the cost is almost going to double, and the more you do it, it's just going to keep getting higher and higher and higher. So if you sit there with an item that has already kind of bad rolls, like on this ring right here, for example, if I wanted to take that physical damage off to try to roll critical hit damage, it really wouldn't be an upgrade because I only have 627 out of 1164 on the maximum life. So yeah, I could roll and get critical strike damage, but the chances are I'm going to find a ring later on that is going to have all of the stats I'm looking for with higher rolls to maximum life, maybe even higher rolls for vulnerable damage, and etc, etc. And another thing you got to consider when enchanting items. Let's say you find an ancestral rare ring, and it has all of the perfect stats. It has critical strike chance, it has vulnerable damage, it has lucky hit chance, it has everything, right? And you're like, oh man, this is great for my build. But you gotta look at the socketed for the hearts, right? So if you want best in slot, you're gonna need 1 blue, usually 1 purple, and then the wrathful doesn't matter because it can go in any of the slots. So if it's a orange heart socket, for example, and you need a blue, well, you're kind of crap out of luck. I hate to say it, but you're gonna want that brutal heart that gives you 20% suppressed damage or damage reduction, so it's really not even worth enchanting at all, because even though it does have great stats, and now noted, you could put your Wrathful Heart in there, so there is kind of a caveat to this rule or this exception, but just make sure, when you're looking at gear and you're thinking about enchanting, okay, you could socket a Wrathful Heart in there, but then you gotta have a blue or a purple or an orange or whatever your class needs. So just be wary and keep an eye out on that, because trust me, I made that mistake so many times. I found rings that were upgrades for me, and then I found out, oh man, it doesn't have the right caged heart. If you're playing a non-seasonal, that whole thing I just talked about doesn't apply to you, because you're gonna socket skulls in there anyways, so just ignore everything I just said if you're playing a non-seasonal. But in seasonal, just keep an eye out on the sockets for the hearts, because that does play a big role. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video on breaking down when to enchant items. And another thing I didn't mention earlier If you got a pair of boots and they're a massive upgrade, but they don't have that inherent affix like max evade charge in your melee build, or it rolled one like this did, but everything else is really, really good, then you don't have to get rid of it. You can enchant it if you want to. Just note though that you might find something better in the long run. And if you're late end game, levels 80 to 100, I wouldn't enchant anything that has lower than 800 item power. You're just going to be wasting your resources unless it's a huge upgrade. Like if you just got into like level 80 and you just got into world tier 4 and you start finding ancestrals, that's the only exception, right? But if you're like 80 to 100 and you have all ancestrals already, don't enchant anything that's below 800 item power unless it's a significant upgrade and it already has 3 out of the 4 affixes with good rolls. Otherwise, this is going to waste your precious resources. And trust me, those forgotten souls and those gold go by quickly. So I hope y'all enjoyed, man. If you found this video at all insightful or helpful, definitely let me know by dropping a like on the video. That would be greatly appreciated. I really hope to catch you all in a future video coming out soon. If you made it all the way till the end, you're an absolute legend. I really, really appreciate your support. And if you do want to see more content just like this, maybe even drop a sub. It really, really helps the channel out, and every subscription matters, man. With that, man, thank you again all for watching. I really hope to catch you all in a future video coming out soon. Stay safe, stay happy, and last but not least, stay gaming. Lion Gaming Crew, signing out.